If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, as well as follow me and subscribe to me on all my other social media platforms. What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with another album review. Yes, this is my first album review I'm doing with the GoPro camera and using the Blue Yeti mic at the same time. But with that said, for this album review, I am talking about the latest studio offering from upcoming Swedish death metal band Bastard Grave with VORTEX of Disgust. So this comes out on March 10th on Pulverized Records, and, well, this is a band that I know because I actually, if I recall, I did review their last album, Diorama of Human Suffering, back in 2019, and it was some really fun, punky, crusty Swedish death metal that definitely has moments that remind me of, like, classic and even latter era Entombed a little bit, as well as even some bands like Gatecreeper a little bit. And, well, how does VORTEX of Disgust stand up in comparison to Diorama of Human Suffering? Well, this album definitely has some different moments on here. Like, pretty much, and also the mixing and mastering of this album was done by Greg Wilkinson, I believe that's his name, who is actually the current bassist for Autopsy. And I think in terms of the mix as well as the production itself, I thought this album sonically sounded quite good. Like, all the instruments were pretty much even in the mix. Like, the guitar tone is downright disgusting and buzzsaw tone from that Boss HM2 style that I am a giant whore for. After all, I believe we just talked about Wretched Fate and how much I just love that gross buzzsaw guitar tone out of Swedish death metal. This album definitely has that tone intact, which is really cool. The bass tone on this album, the bass is actually pretty audible in the mix. Granted, it's not like a super dirty bass, but it's like in between dirty and clean, so to speak. It's not quite as grisly as you would expect from Swedish death metal, but it definitely has its own unique wrinkle into the music. The drum work on this album, mostly revolving around grooves and the occasional blast beat and D-beat stomps, which then gets us into a lot of these songs. Now, pretty much, I'm going to go ahead and talk about a complaint that I had about this album, and that is the fact that this album does get quite formulaic pretty quickly. Like, the opening track, Sunder the Earth, it definitely has some of those, like, hardcore grooves that Diorama of Human Suffering had, but there's a new kind of groove coming in, and that's sludge metal influence. Like, there is some sludgy riffing going on this album, to the point where I was thinking I was listening to Crowbar a little bit when it came down to these sludgy riffs that you get here and there on this album. But here on this opening track, you get pretty much a mixture of sludginess and hardcore moments, but you do get some cool punky D-beats, just the type of stuff I liked about Diorama of Human Suffering. And it even has this, like, little occasional doom build going on. And it was a cool track to kind of get everything started, and then Icon Bearer starts off very sludgy, and then you get into a particular thing you're going to hear quite a bit on the majority of the rest of the album, and that is some disgusting tremolo riffs. Like, this tremolo riff that comes in Icon Bearer feels like something from Morbid Angel's Altars of Madness, but played through a Swedish death metal filter. And it even gets doomy again, but it's still very much sludge forward. Necrotic Ecstasy, which I bet my boy Necrotic Nick's gonna be excited about that song title. But this track was definitely the most sludgy and groovy out of them all. But you do get some, like, really cool crawling riffs that are going on, especially in the middle of the song. Consumed and Forgotten begins with something a little bit different, and that's like this gross, clean melody with some heavy progressions on top. And then it kind of turns into a bit of a Death Doom epitaph, so to speak. Like, it gets a little bit Death Doom at times, and occasionally the drum beats do get into that classic D-beat stomp, and then some more of those gross tremolos. Then in the Nameless Horror, it begins with a dissonant and atmospheric doom riff, and then it just goes back into being more sludgy and groovy on top of some evil tremolo riffs, and it even gets kind of dreary towards the end. Hunger to Devour was the shortest song of the album at about 3.5 minutes, and this song begins with like a horror movie piano intro. Oh, this intro goes on for about a minute, and then the rest of the song is pretty much like a kind of like a good mix of like early Entombed and a little bit of the Death and Roll era of Entombed, like almost like a hybrid, so to speak, of like Left Hand Path, Wolverine Blues, Uprising, and Morning Star kind of mashed together, but with a little more of that sludginess. Eternal Decomposition, right away, groovy, sludgy, but some more of those hardcore moments do come back, which was actually kind of refreshing. And then more D-beats return, which was cool. More tremolos and blasts. And then we get into the final track, the title track, Vortex of Disgust, which for like the first minute and a half after you get this like creepy intro, it's back to being like a Death Doom epitaph, except here it feels very much like Hooded Menace, so to speak. And that Doom influence, like I said, is felt in the first minute and a half of the track before you get the token stuff that you've gotten on the rest of the album, the sludge, the blast beats, the tremolo riffs. But you do get a cool isolated bass line. Well, not isolated, like you still get guitars, but the bass actually had its own voice at one point in the track. And then you get more crawling riffs before you end this track with pretty much how it starts with like creepy atmospherics. Now, in terms of lead work, there are only 2 leads to my recollection. That's the opening track and the closing track, and really these leads were just squealy dive bombs, nothing spectacular. It was just meant to fit the chaos of the album. And while these riffs, you do get a lot of good, catchy, sludgy, groovy riffs on here, it's just for me, I missed the punky stuff that they did on the previous album. Didn't get a whole lot of that on here. This was definitely more like, if I were to best describe this album, it would be like what if Crowbar was playing Swedish death metal. That's kind of the best way to describe this album. But like I said, there are moments that remind me of like Entombed, Morbid Angel, even a little bit of Gatecreeper, especially when it gets into those like hardcore grooves. Definitely made me think of a band like Gatecreeper. Like I said, with the bass tone, it's there. The vocals, I will say the vocals on this album, this is with a new vocalist. I believe his name is Tiago Rias. I believe he's from Denmark, coming into a Swedish band. And he definitely has a much lower gurgle, but occasionally does get into these like unwieldy screams you get here and there on the album. And like I said, there are really good riffs on here, but the songs kind of run together a little bit, and like I said, it does get formulaic pretty quickly. But overall, this was still a good, solid album. In the end, I'm going to give this album a 7.5 out of 10. It is good. There are definitely moments on here that were kick-ass. It's just, I do wish they would have maybe broken up some of these like groovy, sludgy parts with more of those punky D beats, or maybe even throwing a little bit of like thrash into the mix to kind of break up the tempos a little bit more. But still, there are some good songs on here. It's just like I said, a lot of the songs do sound very similar and kind of run together. But yeah, 7.5 out of 10. But of course, that's just my opinion. What did you guys think of Vortex of Disgust by Bastard Grave? Let me know in the comments section below. But until next time, you people out there, keep your horns high and your dreams wet.